Well, welcome everybody to our summer meeting of the East Tennessee Rural Health Consortium. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, and I hope that everybody is weathering the computer glitches with grace and patience. I guess if it has to happen on any day, Friday is a pretty good day for such a thing to happen. So with that, I would like to welcome you to our session, which is going to be on substance use disorder treatment and recovery for youth and young adults. And before we go into our panel, I would just like to take care of a few housekeeping things. First off, as far as setting up your Zoom to be most amenable to our presentation today, I would ask that everybody mute your microphone unless you are asking a question. And if you could also turn off your video camera during the presentation, just so that those who have smaller bandwidth are able to better maintain connection with the presentation. Finally, we are going to have a 10-minute question and answer session following each of the questions that we pose to the panelists. With that, you are very welcome to share your question in the chat room, which we will be monitoring. Or if you can pluck up your courage, we would really like to hear from you, and you can turn on your video and unmute your mic and share your question directly. That would be wonderful. So with our presentation today, each of our questions is going to have 10 minutes for a response from our panelists. Or I should say 15 minutes for our panelists, and that's give or take a few. And then we will have time for Q&A after each of the questions that are asked. And with that, we will then move on to the next question. If there are questions that arise, whether they're associated with the training and the expertise of our panelists or on the information that they have shared, I recommend for you to ask either, because as I go through the introductions of our panelists, you will find that they have a wealth of training and information, and some of that may not be shared in the questions that are asked during our panel. So please keep this in mind. Our first panelist is Jenna Quigley. Jenna is a Deputy Project Director at JBS International on the Rural Communities Opioid Response Program, known as ARCORP. She is also the cohort lead for the ARCORP Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health Program. Ms. Quigley is a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapist, and American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy approved supervisor in both Pennsylvania and Colorado. She also has a private practice where she provides outpatient and in-home therapy services to children, adolescents, adults, couples, and families. Jenna has leadership experience in multi-system program development, implementation, management, and strategic planning in both nonprofit and state governmental systems. She has provided statewide training and technical assistance and led systematic improvement efforts impacting individuals and families related to the intersection of the behavioral health, child welfare, and criminal legal justice systems in both Colorado and Delaware. Ms. Quigley has also led organizational well-being initiatives that focus on the recognition of the impact of trauma and vicarious trauma in the workplace. Welcome, Jenna. Our next panelist is Crystal D. Fortney. Ms. Fortney currently serves as the Director of Youth and Young Adult Initiatives for the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. Crystal is a licensed professional counselor with a designation in mental health for the state of Tennessee and an approved clinical supervisor providing clinical supervision for pre-licensed professional counselors in Tennessee seeking the LPC MHSP credential. She has worked with the early psychosis population since 2016 and has previously served as the first episode psychosis statewide best practice trainer and the Healthy Transitions Project Director. Currently, Ms. Fortney provides leadership and program oversight to the first episode psychosis on-track programs, the clinical high risk for psychosis programs, the health transitions programs, and Certified Young Adult Peer Support Specialist Program, and Young Adult Leadership Council. Crystal has a passion for the professional development of counselors and improving large mental health systems. She is working toward earning her PhD in counseling education and supervision and is expected to graduate in the spring of 2025. Ms. Fortney's overall professional mission is to learn, improve, and transform the complete landscape of mental health. Our final panelist is Dr. Nicola Zaharakis. Dr. Zaharakis is a trained applied developmental psychologist. She currently serves as a research assistant professor in the Center of Behavioral Health Research in the College of Social Work at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Broadly, Dr. Zaharakis' work aims to improve the public health impact of evidence-based. I'm just realizing I'm not going forward here. Evidence-based interventions for substance misuse and mental health prevention and treatment via studying effective implementation and engagement with these programs, with a special focus on mobile health delivered interventions for adolescents, young adults, and their families. Dr. Zaharakis has co-authored or authored 35 scientific studies published in peer-reviewed journals that have primarily focused on risk and protective factors for substance misuse and mental health problems, and interventions to prevent and treat related disorders. So a big warm welcome to all of our panelists. And I would like to pose the first question to Jenna first, then Crystal, and then Nicola. So Jenna, please share your current efforts to promote SUD treatment and recovery with adolescents and young adults.
Thank you so much, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the warm introduction. I feel like you covered everything in my bio already for this question, but I will highlight a few things. So again, I'm a Deputy Project Director at JBS International for the RCORE program, and we provide technical assistance for RCORE grantees nationwide. I'm the lead for the Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health cohort. The goal and purpose of that cohort and that program is to establish and expand sustainable behavioral health care services for children and adolescents ages 5 to 17 and their families and caregivers who live in rural communities, and to prevent substance misuse. For the purposes of that program, behavioral health services aim to address both mental health and substance use disorders. So as a TA provider, and how I help promote treatment and recovery is through supporting the grantees in the rural communities with their implementation of their grant goals and objectives. We provide training, we have learning collaboratives, we provide lots of resources related to behavioral health for children, adolescents, and families. So as a family therapist, I also provide services directly to individuals, couples, and families. I'm not an individual adolescent substance use provider, but as a family therapist, I've worked with families in addressing substance use within the context of the family. I've done lots of work over the years with children and adolescents and younger children as well that have either child welfare or criminal justice system involvement, really trying to address substance use within the context of the family, addressing intergenerational patterns, intergenerational substance use, and supporting families in shifting dynamics to create healthier relationships and healthier dynamics that might be connected to use for an adolescent or a young adult.
Thank you very much. Crystal, can we turn to you?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing me here today to speak to you guys. My name is Crystal Fortney. I am the Director of Youth and Young Adult Initiatives for the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. In that space, I often oversee advocacy, policy, and programmatic leadership for youth and young adult programs across the state that is receiving state funding or federal funding. So in that role, I do a lot of things from a leadership perspective or like a contract perspective to help with substance use reduction. So for example, some of our programs that we have in under our umbrella is our first episode psychosis program that Lori mentioned that I oversee, our statewide young adult leadership council, our certified young adult peer support specialist program, and some of our healthy transition programs across the state. And all of those programs are geared towards youth and young adults, starting at the age of 12, going up to the age of 30. So from a state perspective, what I do is integrate substance use protocols into our contracting. So all of our sites are required to have substance use screenings for our young people. Often we require substance use education as a part of those curriculums. So their therapists are required to have some psychoeducation around substance use. We also collaborate with other agencies and other systems. So for example, our young adult peer support specialist program collaborates with UTK for their recovery programs for their student ambassadors. So basically we train their young people to be able to provide peer support around substance use on their campuses. So we oftentimes work with college campuses across the state to be able to do that. We also collaborate with our intervention programs in the department. And so now we have incorporated screenings for substance use and opioid use in all of our programs. And we've kind of set up a referral network so that they can be referred to an intervention kind of act type of team. So we kind of work from a programmatic way to combat substance use at this level. I'm also a licensed professional counselor, and my specialty is also young people. I like to help young people figure out how to adult. That was the favorite part of my life, but now I'm an auntie, so I don't fit into that category. So I help young people figure it out. And so in my space, I do work with young people who are struggling with substance use and addictions. I also like working in Black and Brown communities. So a lot of the work that I do is providing psychoeducation around substance use and just providing resources of where those communities can get help, and especially Black and Brown youth. So that's the work that I do to advocate for people and young people who are struggling with substance use disorders.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Nicola.
Sure, thank you. Like Crystal and Jenna have said, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here with you all today and to be sharing a panel with these ladies and learning more about their work as well. I am a research assistant professor at the college. I am a psychologist by training in applied developmental psych. Also did a lot of training in clinical psych. And have been working in the substance use prevention and treatment space for almost 20 years. My work really over the past decade or so has been really in looking at interventions to treat sort of early intervention for adolescents and young adults, particularly using technology-based strategies. So I have been working with a program called Peer Network Counseling, which for a long time, it's originally was developed as a brief face-to-face motivational interviewing based intervention that we have translated into a text delivered intervention, completely automated, no counselor sitting on the other end kind of texting you back, but tailored so that we give you an assessment ahead of time and tailor the intervention using some of the information that you've told us. And of course, clinically, we are always watching sort of what folks respond to and following up as needed, even though there's no sort of live clinician sitting there. But in recent years, my colleagues and I have just recently finished up a large NIDA grant that we had to test that with over 1,000 young adults with cannabis use disorder in Tennessee and in Colorado, and are just starting to look at some of the results of that. So it's a 1-month intervention. They get texts every other day, and it doesn't require them to quit. It's based on MI, so based on what they want to make their goals as. We're also looking at that. We're starting to look at that for alcohol use in young adults. We've looked at it previously with teens that were starting to use substances, but not necessarily dependent or have a use disorder in any particular way, but trying to sort of get them off that trajectory of moving toward a substance use disorder. More recently, we've been adding into that and kind of trying to combine that with the mental health side that these ladies were talking about, because we're finding so far that some of our results from that cannabis use disorder study suggest that the intervention works if you are, for young adults, if they were only struggling with cannabis use disorder. If you also have depression, anxiety, some other mental health stuff going on, really wasn't working as well for them. And so we've now been working over the last couple of years to translate cognitive behavioral therapy into a text message delivered intervention, and trying to use that to target this comorbid population that struggles with both mental health and substance use disorders. Also, not as much of the focus of today, but also trained as a prevention scientist and have some work I'm doing with Cherokee Health System, looking at better integrating a prevention version of this text message program into their services for both adolescents and their parents, because we know that that's important to sort of include the parents when we can, especially with younger kids. That's sort of and I also take a look a lot at, we've trained a lot in implementation science and trying to figure out not just how do we develop these programs and how do we test them, but how do we work with agencies like Cherokee Health, like McNabb Health, with the state and things like that, to integrate them in the best way using evidence-based strategies. So I think I will stop there, but happy to elaborate on anything if that would be useful or interesting to folks.
Thank you to you all. Are there any questions at this time from the audience? I have a question for Crystal, if I may. In your work, you discussed collaborating with the University of Tennessee. If I'm living in a community, for example, where Lincoln Memorial University is, or a community college or technical institute, how might I connect with you to see if this type of collaboration is possible with you at my university?
For sure. So what we do now is, I don't know if you guys heard of it, but we have a program in the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives here called Collegiate Recovery. And so that whole model is to connect with universities and community campuses across Tennessee to embed substance use peer groups in those spaces. And so what our youth and young adult department does is try to tag on along with them as much as possible. I often call my department the one that we like to infiltrate every system and department. So we like to collaborate with everybody because we love the ideal of continuity of care. So we collaborate with them to basically train student ambassadors. So with their program, they try to encourage these college campuses to put in a student ambassador program for recovery. So what we do is train their student ambassadors as certified young adult peers to be able to look at the spectrum of like co-occurring disorders. Because a lot of times it's just kind of like Nicole said, just focused on substance use, and oftentimes wellness doesn't include the mental health component, but we know that a lot of our young people are dealing with those mental health issues as well. So we're collaborating with their department to kind of infiltrate these college campuses and tag along and just kind of make awareness that our program exists, and kind of convince these campuses to get their young people trained as certified peers that's in recovery. But if a campus was interested, all you have to do is send me an email and we will literally come out and give you a presentation around CEPs. We will also talk about how to integrate them into your campuses, and we'll work with your university on training students if you have them. We do organizational trainings a lot. So yeah, we'll set that up and have a meeting and make it happen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to move ahead then to our second question. This order will start with Crystal, then go to Nicola, and then follow up with Jenna. Given your experience, please discuss the importance of developmentally appropriate practices in treating substance use disorder for adolescents and young adults, and how this plays out in your professional efforts. Crystal?
Absolutely. So this is probably one of my favorite questions. I just left DC from a Black Youth Suicide Policy Academy sponsored by SAMHSA, and they had a youth and young adult panel to discuss youth and young adult mental health and substance use and suicide. And I think from listening to them and then the work that we already do, it's so important to integrate youth into the work that you're doing. It's so important to meet our young people where they are. So often we as adults feel like we have the recipe to help them be better, even with using evidence-based practices and all of these things. If we don't have rapport, it doesn't work. This generation is also very different. And so at the department, we do a lot of training around just youth culture, Gen Z culture, what is important to them, and what they like to feel like treatment works. Also understanding the trends of this population and the trends of substance use is so important. And so we've realized integrating them into our programming has tremendously helped our young people and like meeting them where they are. And so we've embedded young people in crisis centers. We've embedded young people into our programming. In fact, every program that we have here for youth and young adults under my umbrella has a youth and young adult peer on that team to meet these young people where they are. And we have found that to be very effective in like bringing young people to the ideal of even wanting to reduce the substance use, because oftentimes they view us as the professional and that we don't understand what they're experiencing in this generation, and we don't understand what's important to them. And so I think the biggest thing that I've learned is if we're going to create something for young people, we should involve them in the creation of things for them. And we should involve them in policy, programming, grant writing, in every aspect of treating them. I also think we should meet them where they are virtually, meaning that I know some of us hate social media. We just trained some of our leadership in TikTok because they were so against it. But we literally Googled mental health in TikTok and showed them all of the videos of people talking about their mental health and like sharing their experiences, and like even listening to providers who are like medical doctors, like describing diagnosis and substance use issues, and how social media can be used for bad, but also that's where our young people go to get help. That's where our young people go to define their experiences. So I think integrating young people, meeting them where they are, being open to different resources, being open to different ways of reaching them, understanding the trends of substance use for this population, and also integrating them into programming of how to reduce their substance use or the reasons why they're not reducing their substance use, is really important for any level of work that you're doing, whether it's direct care or systematic. I have a saying that we have a saying in our department: nothing about us without us. And so we do nothing for them without them. So yeah, that's what I would encourage people to do, is just find you a young person and make them a partner in any work that you're doing.
Thank you. Nicola, can we turn to you?
Absolutely. Crystal, I love that. I may need some of that Gen Z culture training because I have been learning as well. I'm an applied developmental psychologist. Of course, I think sort of age and stage is a lot of where I come from. We do approach things differently if we're thinking about a teenager who hopefully, while there are some that have, fully advanced to substance use disorder, hopefully most have not and are starting to maybe, experiment, but have not fully gotten there. And so we think more about prevention and early intervention there, treatment if we need it, but addressing them with maybe different sorts of information than we do our young adults, where we can, they're a little bit older, their brains are a little bit more developed. We can think more about giving them more information. And they're a little bit more in control of their lives. But absolutely agree. We have been learning that message of getting youth and young adults involved and hearing from them in multiple ways. First off, I think just even from my students, and I'm excited to see Rebecca, a student I've worked with before, on our call today. Hi, Rebecca. But getting that feedback, because I like to think that I'm not that old, but I am. Gen Z, I haven't, been in my teens in over 20 years. And I think this generation is different for a lot of different reasons, right? They not only are growing up in a much different time than we did, but they went through COVID, many of them. And I can't imagine having been a teenager or in college during COVID. It created a different sort of world for them. And meeting them where they're at. So that's why we've been moving more toward text-based interventions, because that's where they feel more comfortable. It's a way to hopefully reach more people, folks in rural areas, folks who don't have the time or energy to get to treatment in person, or just feel really uncomfortable with it or unsure how to do it. And social media as well. We were forced to sort of look more at social media during the pandemic when we were about to, that cannabis use disorder trial that I talked about was set to start recruitment in April 2020. So right at the start of the pandemic. And so we had to sort of revamp, move everything to virtual, and really use social media as our way to engage folks into our study. And that worked really well because a lot of them are there and a lot of them are learning information off of social media. And this idea of micro learning, right, that I've gotten interested in recently, and I've been trying to find other ways to use that mechanism, because folks are getting a lot of information there. I spend a lot of time looking at silly TikTok reels and Facebook reels, right? But it's more enjoyable when it's something that I'm actually getting, useful information out of it. And how can we ensure that the videos that they are watching, the bits of information that they're getting, are useful information? So I get some of that, I think I was saying, from my students. My students have, especially my undergrad students who are a little younger, have pushed back on some of our things and suggested that we think about our language, that we think about how we ask different questions and whether we ask different questions. So asking about, we're not in some of our studies looking at gender. We collect sex, right? Because we know that mental health and substance use sometimes manifest differently in males versus females. We got the feedback from some of our participants in our studies, as well as some of our staff, that we have to ask about gender, even if it's not something that we're necessarily going to be able to analyze in our study because it's a smaller pilot, but that it's kind of off-putting if we're not asking that. And so now we've integrated sort of asking that, and are doing more to sort of integrate their voices into some of this work. So with that Cherokee study that I mentioned, I'm doing some interviews with parents and teens to get, before we launch this prevention program into their system, to get parents and teens perspectives on how would you want this? What makes sense for you all? What do you think about this language? What do you think about this program? And I thought we would, we're only like partway through that, but I thought we would get lots of good information from the parents. I thought the teens, I was like, I don't know, is a 14 or 15-year-old boy really going to want to sit down with me and tell me some things? They have some thoughts, and their thoughts are really useful and really interesting. And so I think getting their voices incorporated so that we can make it something that's more relevant to them, as Crystal was saying, and thinking about sort of age and stage of where they are at. Are they, where is their brain development? Sort of where are they at in terms of being, more connected to family versus not, and offering an appropriate level of care that meets them where they are most comfortable, I think is very important.
Thank you. Jenna, on to you.
Great. Love a couple of the things that you both said, just to piggyback on them. Crystal, you talked about like culture and trends and why that's so important. Integrating youth into everything. Nicola, you talked about brain development and environmental influences. And I think all of what you both shared really connects to involving, like looking at the adolescent in context. So we want to look at them in the context in which they live. And then it's important to think about who is important to them, who's in their life, and how can we involve them in whatever interventions or treatment, even in prevention, intervention, treatment, recovery. How can we include the people that are important to them in those services? So, we often think about like adolescents going through identity development. We think about peers becoming a strong influence in their life, but family, parents, caregivers still play a really significant role and still have a lot of influence over behavior and what happens. Sometimes that influence can be over related to risky choices. There's some, research out there that adolescents will kind of align to the risky choices of their parents more so than risky choices of peers. But parents, caregivers, and families still have the power to help their adolescent or young adult. And so when I think about developmentally appropriate practices, I think about including, again, whoever is important to them, whoever's in their life, and figuring out how can we make some shifts there? How can we involve them? How can we help those relationships? How can we address some of what may be contributing to the adolescent substance use in their environment and in their relationships? So I really think about, doing that. I also think about having developmentally appropriate screening, assessment, treatment. We want to, you mentioned brain development and how important that is. So we don't want to use the same treatments and the same, screening tools that we're using with adults, with adolescent and young adult populations. And we want to have interventions that really target family risk and protective factors. So we want to be thinking about what's contributing. Is there parental substance use or substance use somewhere in the family? Is there conflict happening? How can we strengthen attachment? How can we strengthen connections? Wherever, again, getting the input of the adolescent, where is their opportunity? What relationships do they want to strengthen? We know connection's really important in treatment and recovery. So thinking about that. It also makes me think about having adolescents being treated in the least restrictive environment as possible. It's often really challenging for anybody, but adolescents, particularly if we're sending them out of state to go to treatment, that may be the only option. But if we're sending them to inpatient or residential level of care, nowhere near their environment that they're going to be returning to, we really need to be mindful of how are we going to support them in that transition back to, whatever environment. Again, how can we pull in people to support and how can we address some of the factors that are playing a role there? I think those are, the other thing that just developmentally appropriate services and practices makes me think of is coming from a strength-based perspective. We should always do that, but especially for adolescents, really thinking about as they're forming their identity, where do they connect? What are their strengths? How can we build on those? What's working well for them? Similar to Crystal, you mentioned like meeting them where they're at. So we want to meet them where they're at, and we want to focus on some of the strengths to be able to help shift some of the behaviors that we're seeing that they want help in shifting.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Do we have any questions from the audience?
I have a quick little, I don't know, it's not necessarily a question, but when in 20, I work with the school system a lot. We do a lot of prevention classes. I'm the prevention coordinator for our county, and we surveyed our in 2021. I had our data, and just under 25% of the students reported using alcohol within our like a lifetime use. And then of that 25% who had reported that, over 30% of our students said that they got it from their parents or family with permission. So that's what you're saying, Jen, about the family involvement and influence about that. That's one of the things that we're really struggling with is getting, because we can have prevention classes and everything, but then they go home, they're spending more time with their family than they are with us. And so it's like we teach them things, but there's nothing in our community that really, I guess, reinforces what we're teaching in our classes, in our prevention classes. And so it's a struggle for us countywide. Our school systems have always had problems getting parent involvement. And so if you have any, I don't know, suggestions, avenues, things that we can try, because we've struggled with that for years to try to get parents involved.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear what everybody else says too. I know, Nicole, you're a prevention specialist, but so this comes up all the time. I hear this across the country with all of the grantees that I work with. We do lots of training around family engagement because it's so, and partnering with families because it can be challenging, especially if you're in the school setting. I often hear like, oh, well, they just get that at school, or they, you can fix them, or you deal with that. I don't need to be involved. And so some of the things that I've seen folks do to try to address some of that. There are some evidence-based programs for prevention that incorporate families. The first one off the top of my head is Strengthening Families. That's one that is really supportive of addressing both family caregiver, like parenting needs, and the needs of different children at different age stages of development. But if you can't implement a whole new program that incorporates some of that caregiver perspective, I've seen a lot of communities trying to build partnership with families in different ways. So even if it's not directly related to prevention work, a lot of communities host community events. So we can it will be something fun, but they will bring a prevention and treatment focus to it, where they just get information out about services that are offered. They're going to back to school nights to talk to, I don't know if your school has that, but to talk to parents and provide information about the services that are available and the information that the kids are hearing at school through whatever prevention programming you're using. So one of the things that I think helps get in the door in terms of partnerships is figuring out what does that family need. Really focusing on social determinants of health and kind of, do they need food? Do they need housing? Do they need transportation? Trying to figure out what their needs are to be able to form that partnership. We're here to support you not only with this treatment, but we want to support you more broadly and try to help meet some of those needs. I was going to talk about this later, but I don't know if you run into any issues with parental consent for any of the services that you're providing. I don't know if that's something that's needed in the school that you're working in, but trying to provide lots of information up front. Again, trying to join those like back to school nights, or if the school has any forms for the year that need to be signed, kind of including that information and consent forms as a part of that, providing lots of information. It's tough when parents are using too, or when they're okay with it. That can be challenging. And it depends on kind of what the attitude is around that. Are they struggling with their own use? And so that's impacting their parenting ability, or do they think it's not a big deal? Or do they think it won't become a problem? That's where some psychoeducation around adolescent brain development and use and what that looks like plays a role. Those are the things off the top of my head, but I'm interested to hear what our other panelists think too.
Totally agree. Getting family involvement is difficult but important. And there is research to show, I did my dissertation on looking at how parents communicate with their college age students around cannabis, and the relationship between them, and saw that even at the college level, and even if you're living on campus, there's a relationship there. Folks still care about their parents, don't want to disappoint their parents. So if we can educate parents around communicating those expectations of, you know, here's what substance use is about, here's what I expect for you. That's important. Though I hear that, you know, what you're saying, Mindy, the other side is sometimes we have parents that are okay with, okay, you know, there's that, well, if you're going to try it, I'd rather you try it in front of me, right? Or just that it's in the house, okay? True story, I was a kid who smoked cigarettes. Where did I get them? My dad, because they were in the house. So we know that access is, you know, number one issue. But I think a couple things, and I agree with everything Jenna said, that one, I think when I was doing some work at Arizona State on my postdoc, I worked on a family prevention program for substance use. And sometimes we would debate about what was considered part of the program. I know it's tricky, especially at state level when y'all are working with shoestring budgets and trying to make a lot happen. But we had our sort of core program. It was an after-school program for parents and teens. And we would sort of debate about, is it just the program that's the intervention, or is this other stuff around it? So what was the other stuff around it? We offered pizza and childcare and, you know, reminder calls and all these kind of things, because we needed to address mom and dad's other issues. Of course, also thinking about, we didn't have, you know, in the context of that, the ability to sort of talk about, do you need housing? Are you struggling with substance use? Those sorts of things. But even at the very simplest, like, it was after school. If we could offer them an easy way that, okay, if we show up, we'll get some information, the kids will all get fed dinner. The other kids who aren't in the group, there'll be, you know, some folks to watch them. That really helped our engagement. So that was helpful in getting folks in the door, as well as sort of thinking about, you know, some of the text, the tech-based stuff, the social media stuff, the text-based stuff. So my group and I are really excited about, you know, trying to branch into looking at more parenting things. I did a lot of parenting work when I was in graduate school. So that, you know, program that I talked about that we're working with Cherokee on, there's a parenting component. It's text message based. It's really just basic education around what we know works to prevent adolescent substance use. Talk to your kids, set expectations, check in on them, have a warm relationship, giving folks that information, maybe via text in a way they can look at it when they have the time. They don't have to worry about maybe showing up to something. And SFP, absolutely. So SFP 10 to 14, Strengthening Families program. One of my colleagues is working on trying to, because that's a, you know, well evidence-based program, but also kind of an intensive program. Have to show up to lots of sessions. We're trying to find ways to sort of create some shorter videos that we could try and send out to folks, maybe as a way to get them engaged into the larger program, maybe as a way to just give them some information if they can't get to the larger program. But like Crystal was saying earlier, trying to find ways to meet people where they're at, because being a parent is a busy job. Being a parent and having a job is even busier in our, you know, sort of crazy world where there's so much going on. I think those are my thoughts. I'll stop rambling there.
I'll add on. I think they did an amazing job of like summarizing like all of the things that I probably would have said in other different ways. The only thing that I would add to that is just different layers of just the way that I think. So I think a lot of it is working with school counselors and supervising them and talking to them. You guys only have a small window of time to help these young people. And I had no idea about that window because I'm an LPC. So you come and lay on the couch. It was a little different. So when I was supervising school counselors, I was like, man, you guys only have like 7 to 10 minutes, 15 minutes to help like these young people. And that's not a lot of time to like put in an intervention and then find out these data results that you guys have gotten, and then like trying to figure out how to incorporate parents who are like not involved. And so I just have so much empathy for you guys and like gratitude for the work that you do. A part of that though, I always kind of thought about the levels of culture, but it's also because I'm so interested in culture humility. But just the level of culture that comes with this is that like your county has a culture, and rural Tennessee versus urban areas in Tennessee, there's a different culture. And so I think being mindful, and you probably know the culture because you work there, but mindful of just the culture of the area you in is so important and plays an important part in how you decide to join parents into the work that you do, because your culture will determine a lot. But also being mindful of like their family culture as well. One of the things that I learned is that people are so much more interested in how do we provide this intervention versus what is the story of the young person that I'm working with, and what is the story of their family, and how does substance use play a role in there, and what roles does substance use play? Because sometimes substance use can be a big thing. It can be something where the family connects around or whatever it is, but what role does substance use play? Because sometimes we're trying to remove something that like connects them together, and it might not be effective. So I wouldn't show up as a parent if you're removing something that like joins us together. It's not a great thing, but we don't know. So I would encourage people to spend some time of trying to figure out what's the culture and what's the family culture, and how does that contribute to the young person using, and what is it served for. But also leaning on the network around you, because you only have a certain amount of time to help this young person. And so are there any other programs in the area that can maybe offer some family support or some family peer support, or that can do more of that kind of hands-on wraparound approach on those families that can go deeper into the work that you don't have enough time to do? So figuring out who are your stakeholders in the community and kind of joining with them to support the young person, but also support their families, I feel like would be more powerful. Also like mentors, and I think Jenna said it early, other necessary partners. When she talked about family, our young people often identify family as other people outside of their actual family members. So who are those necessary partners in our young people's lives, and how can we leverage that? So maybe they have a favorite coach, or maybe they have a youth pastor, or maybe they have a mentor, they're in the Boys and Girls Club. Like, what other necessary partners in their young person life can you leverage that they may consider family? Because then you can kind of create this like family they like to use, but like this other family I have over here that I created kind of tells me that I don't like to use, and maybe like oppose that to each other to help the young person create values or things like that. But it can get very, very layered. But I do think leveraging other stakeholders in the community and resources, and also leveraging other necessary partners in their young person life that they identify as like family or necessary supports.
Can I add one more thing I just thought of, or two more things? So sometimes, family, whoever, adults in the child's life don't feel like their voice is valued. And so figuring out ways to let them know that you are very important in this child's life. They might feel them separating from them. They might feel like they don't listen to them. They might feel like they aren't that important anymore, but letting them know that their voice and what happens in their family, their culture, this is what made me think of it. Thank you, Crystal. All of that is really important and valuable, and that you do value that. The other thing I just wanted to point out is I think you said, tell me if this is wrong, I think you said 25% of students reported using alcohol. So that means 75% don't, or at least didn't report it, which is really great. So focusing, we tend to focus on the portion of the population that is using, but there's also a large portion of your population in your school that's not using. And how can you pull in this other students and have them be in leadership positions to help bring in that peer influence and build some healthy connection there.
That was a lot of rich information, so thank you so much. And just, I also have to say, Mindy actually has a youth council that works on substance use challenges in the middle school. So she's got it all going on. So a lot of those pieces she's already doing, but I'm hoping, Mindy, that you also gain some new insight there, because that was a really great list of resources. Thank you. Okay. Here. I promised that I would put up this slide as we ask this question. We're on to question number 3. Nicola, Jenna, and then Crystal will be doing this one. Given your current efforts in substance use disorder treatment and recovery for young people, clarify how an ecological approach as presented here, particularly incorporating peers and parents or caregivers, is relevant in treating substance use disorder during adolescence and young adulthood. And you've already touched on this a little bit, so I appreciate if it becomes abbreviated, but we shall start with Nicola, move on to Jenna, and then Crystal.
Yeah, we have, and I'm glad, because I've had some additional thoughts too. So I think super important, like these ladies were talking about, and one maybe, thinking about it from a developmental psychologist perspective, are just sort of basic parenting and basic development. And are there ways that we can offer parents some more information about what to expect? I'm not a parent, but I can imagine that it would be very difficult to start to feel, like Jen was saying, feel your kid pulling away and then thinking that means that they don't value my input, and why should I worry about telling them what to do, because they're not going to listen to me anyway, they're going to listen to their friends. But we know that that's not accurate, and so maybe finding ways to give parents some basic education around this is developmentally appropriate. They're going through this next phase where it's time to start rolling back a little bit, and so you may feel them disconnecting, but they still value your input very much. I think so. Going back to talking about that intervention that I was talking about earlier that I've been studying for a while, peer network counseling. This is, what we've been talking about, and the ecological model sort of falls into that, because part of the goal of that intervention, it's motivational interviewing based, but the goal is to help the participant, and mostly we've used it with young adults, some with teens, we ask them ahead of time about their peer network. Who is close to them? Who are your close friends? What do they do for you? Both risk and protective. Do they offer you emotional support, physical support, instrumental support? Are they, helping you drive somewhere or whatever? And then also risk behavior. Are you using with them? And what sorts of spaces are you spending time in? And part of the intervention is helping reflect that back to them and help them think about, okay, especially as a young adult, right? We're likely not going to, especially as counselors or folks trying to help them in recovery and treatment, going to do very well if we kind of just cut them out and say, well, you need to cut these bad folks out of your life. These friends that are using are bad. But instead help them kind of identify that the friends that aren't using as much, and maybe making some adjustments to maybe spending some more time with those friends that aren't using, or spending time with the friends that are using in spaces where you're less likely to use. So instead of, maybe if you have a good friend that you hang out with at, the college dorm, if you're in college and you want to use cannabis together, maybe not needing to drop that friend, but maybe, adjusting to, maybe there are other sorts of spaces you can spend time with them. Maybe you can go to the gym with them and engage in a healthier activity, and sort of draw on what Jen was saying, that 75% that aren't using, and leverage their not use to sort of support the idea that you don't have to use, you can make these changes and there can still be support around you. I think a couple other things, I think there's some, good work happening from some of my colleagues trying to look at both, how do we integrate, particularly with opioid treatment, how do we integrate peers? How do we integrate families? So I have a colleague at University of Kentucky who's been trying to build an intervention and figure out how we could pull in peers and family of young adults who are struggling with opioid use disorder. How can we better incorporate them into the treatment to help support that? We have been working a little bit, my colleagues and I, with Aaron Hogue, who is the director of the adolescent division up at the Partnership to End Addiction. He has a program that he's been trying to run looking at incorporating family into treatment, and particularly medication assisted treatment for opioid use disorder with young adults, to help educate them, to help them understand what the young adult is going through, how to support that treatment and recovery, and help change maybe some of the stigma, especially with opioid use disorder. We're often thinking about if it's medication assisted treatment, and there are lots of sort of different ideas on what that looks like and whether that's the right thing or not. The research suggests that it's sort of the best treatment we have, but folks have some feelings about switching to a medication form of opioid of opiates to manage that. And so he's been really trying hard to get parents involved in that, help them to support that and to understand where the young adult is at and how to be developmentally appropriate with that, and sort of not maybe come off as, okay, you're a young adult, you have opioid use disorder, mom and dad are now just going to dictate, because that's not really exactly developmentally appropriate either, right? They're still a young adult. They need some autonomy to take the responsibility for their treatment, but they also need the support from the folks around them. And so I think thinking about these different levels of how can we incorporate is important, especially parents and peers, but also some of the things we were mentioning before, and thinking there's research out there to suggest, like Crystal and Jenna were saying, how can we sort of pull in other important adults in their lives, whether they be coaches or folks at church or wherever else, to educate them and help them get that message along, as well as we don't need to drink alcohol or use or whatever in order to cope or in order to have fun or whatever that might be, because those folks are influential, and the youth are more likely to sort of look to and accept that message from folks in the community that they respect and that they feel comfortable and trust, than just a counselor that they're meeting with for a short while. So I think I will stop there and let Jenna and Krista share thoughts. Crystal.
Very good. Thank you, Nicola. Jenna?
Yeah, I feel like we've talked a lot about incorporating peers and parents or caregivers, but even if you can't see this image on the page, if you go to if you Google this image or go to the website at the bottom there, I feel like this mental health and well-being model is just really great and inclusive of lots of different factors that play a role in mental health and well-being. And so if we're thinking about addressing substance use for adolescents and young adults, if we look at all of the different influences that might play a role, might contribute, and then look for where are there opportunities on these different levels. So at the individual level, where is there opportunity to shift things? Within that little individual circle, we see coping skills, leadership and life skills. Those might be areas for opportunity. We might not be able to influence so much on the biological and genetic factors, but we can influence in other places. In that interpersonal circle, this is, and it's kind of listed throughout the rest of the other circles here, are those family and peer relationships, and that they serve a significant role. So where is their opportunity? I think Crystal said it really nicely earlier, of like figuring out what their story is, that broader context for that adolescent or young adult. what has happened in their life that might contribute to why they're using or what's going on there. Even if you can't get another support person or another, a family member or a caregiver or a parent to participate in treatment or recovery, how can you, like, metaphorically bring them into the room? How can you ask about those relationships? How can you talk about it? Maybe they've had trauma related to their family. Is there opportunity to address that? What can organizations do? You all have a consortium, which is wonderful. You're working on that cross-sector collaboration to be able to strengthen outcomes and access to services. So I think that's really, really important for adolescent and young adult, anything across the board, but especially with children and adolescents, that cross-system communication, building that system of care is very, very important to making sure that things are connected. Our systems are very challenging to navigate. So helping that child or their family navigate the systems, that is an important piece of treatment and recovery, helping to be able to figure out, where do I even go for support? What do I do? Who can I reach out to if I need help? And then looking at the broader policy and societal levels as well. So I just encourage, like, looking at this, figuring out where are there some opportunities? What am I already doing? What are we already doing that's working really well? Are we already impacting some of these factors that influence mental health and well-being? Just wanted to make a note about family treatment as well. So there's evidence-based models out there for treatment for adolescent substance use that include family. There's multi-systemic family, there's functional family therapy, multi-dimensional family therapy, brief strategic. There's all these evidence-based programs. Even if you can't implement an evidence-based program, can you pull in family-centered practices? Can you think about, I know I already said this, but can we value the voice of the adolescent and their family? Can we figure out what their needs are? Can we figure out what they can realistically participate in, if anything? Do we need to meet some of those basic needs? If we think of the, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, do we need to meet some of those basic needs before a treatment is even a viable option or something that they can participate in? Do we need to build in supports for transportation or childcare? I know that was previously mentioned, but I think all of those pieces are important as we're thinking about that, taking an ecological approach and thinking about incorporating family into services.
Thank you, Jenna. Crystal.
Absolutely. They are so hard to follow because they have went through this whole chart already. So I think this chart should be plastered in your office somewhere. They mentioned this chart and I printed it off and it's on my wall now. But I think it should kind of be a reminder for ourselves of how layered and how hard this work can sometimes be, and how many barriers our young people are just generally facing to just get help in our families. I kind of shared this with the panel before we got here. We have a team here in our department that's called the State Transition Team. And the team is put together of policyholders, community stakeholders, and we have young people on that council as well, to basically talk about the barriers that young people face in navigating systems and navigating resources to get treatment. And so we have all of these stakeholders from the Department of Housing, the Department of Education, we're all at the table, and these young people are basically telling us everything that we're doing wrong, and it's completely fine because that's what they're supposed to do. But in this, we found how hard it is for young people just to access help. So for an example, we talked about navigating websites. So we gave our young people a task to put in mental health resources or crisis resources if they were thinking about dying by suicide. And so we gave them a task to put it in Google and then navigate where they needed to go. And so we basically screen recorded this and realized how hard it was for these young people just to get to our websites to get help. And then when they got to our website, it was so wordy and complicated that they were like, where do I go? Where's the suicide number? Like, do I call this number? How do I know what region I'm in? And so there were so many questions that our young people had about like just reaching resources to get help. And so we all took this and we thought about the system, right? Of like, if our young people think about this, what do their caregivers think, right? Like, are their caregivers, like, can they navigate this site? So if they wanted to get help, they wanted to get resources, was it even easier for them to be able to do it? And if a young person can't find it on the web, I know older people, they're not going to find it on the web either. Like their caregivers are not going to be able to do that. And so really having this chart in front of us, again, we think about intervention, but we also have to think about like access to treatment, access to resources, access to education, like on these different levels. Like, do our families and do our young people, is it easy for them to figure out this information? Also, just that panel also works from a policy level all the way down to an individual level for a young person. And so we were thinking about resource to treatment, but we was also thinking about policies that may need to be changed and looked at to meet the needs of young people. One of the requirements of our Healthy Transitions program, which was for and young adults, one of the goals was each one of our individual community mental health agencies had to change a policy that was youth and young adult friendly. And so some of that included just changing the signage. Some of them included changing their policies around text messaging, all of these things, right? Like, what policies can we change, whether it's at a community level, whether it's in your own organization? What policies can we change to affect youth and young adults that are dealing with substance use disorders? I know Jenna talked a lot about evidence-based practices. One of the practices we use for our program is multifamily groups. We use that because it tells us, like, we've tried the pizza parties, we've tried we've tried all of that, and in certain areas that just doesn't work because it's more rural and the payoff is just not worth it for them. So we brought in this model of evidence-based practice to teach our our program sites, how to join family members in the process. So that has been helpful to talk about more of like how to engage them. How do we start talking about engaging family from like day one? So I know oftentimes we try to engage family members when we have identified a problem, but we start to talk about how do we include family members in conversations about families from the first time our young people enter our offices. So we start to think about that. We start to think about our necessary partners, and we start to think about like their whole system again of like, who is important to them? Can we bring them to the table? Can we leverage it to affect all of these systems? So that's the work that we're kind of doing over here. And then I would encourage you guys to do is just think about yourself, policy, the community that your young people are coming from again. What's the culture around that? What's the culture of these organizations? And like just the access to resources and interventions at these different levels.
Thank you all so very much. Do we have any questions from the audience about the ecological model in relation to adolescent substance use disorder treatment and recovery? Very good. Let's move on to number 4 then. And this time we'll be starting with Jenna, move on to Crystal, and then Nicola. Number 4, given your contributions to substance use disorder treatment for adolescents or young adults, please share barriers or challenges you have encountered. And there's quite a few of them that you might potentially list. And then, do you have any approaches to solving one or more of the challenges that you raise? And again, Jenna, start us out.
Okay. Some of this might be a repeat, so I'll try to go quicker, but one of the things that I've seen for a very long time, I think it's gotten better, and your consortium is an example of trying to improve this, but a lack of integrated care and siloed systems. It can be just a challenge in general, but particularly difficult for children, adolescents, and families. So what we can do about that is having more coordinated care, easier to access systems, collaborating with partners across systems and within the community, having programs in place that can address mental health, substance use, trauma, and those social determinants of health. So you don't have to go here for one thing and go here for somewhere else. And then again, looking at the adolescent, broadly in their system. Kind of connected to this is access to care. So I know that there's less child and adolescent providers than adult providers. I know that there's a lack of that specialized care, and that people often have to travel far for care, especially in rural communities, and that can be really challenging. So a couple things that folks can do. Doing community needs assessments or community mapping to figure out what exists in our community and where are the gaps. Something I hear consistently again across the country is, oh, we all got together and we didn't realize that we already had a service for this, or someone was already providing this service, or someone was already doing this. So now that we know what everybody's doing, we can really hone in on where those gaps are and figure out who can maybe step in to meet the needs, or do we need to, so many communities do secure funding to address this need, but really figuring out what already exists and figuring out a way to help support the community in knowing what's out there. Because if we don't all know what's out there, chances are they don't know what's out there. Kind of like what Crystal was talking about with, like, how do you navigate to find these services on the website? It can be tough, especially if you don't know where to go, you don't know what you're looking for, especially when it comes to treatment. There's so many different, we have 3 different types of mental health professionals on our panel. We have a psychologist, a family therapist, and a licensed professional counselor. And people don't know what the differences are, for those things. They don't know what to look for. So really helping make it easier for families to access what is there. Connected to access to care is, of course, workforce. I know that's a challenge in rural communities, especially. So things like pay is something to look at. Benefits are something to look at. Training and support for well-being. We might not always have flexibility in terms of pay or in terms of benefits, but are there opportunities to provide training, and training, more like broad training? So training for everyone at whatever level of an organization, training on things like trauma-informed approaches, adolescent brain development, substance use disorders, and then supporting well-being. This work is really hard. And so if people feel more supported, they're more likely to stay in the hard work, even if you can't offer additional pay for that work. Just a few other things I want to touch on. I already said this, but accessing basic needs, that's something I still see families struggling to access basic needs. And stigma. So stigma continues to be a challenge. So people can do community outreach, provide education, bring in perspectives and support of those with lived experience to help figure out how can we address stigma in our community? What's the concern here? What's the community going to respond to? What is needed? I will pause there.
Crystal, can you take this question next?
For sure. So I agree with her wholeheartedly. Her whole list is like absolutely, especially access to treatment and like resources. But I will add something different. There is youth and young adult spaces is so important. We talk a lot about this like bridge. Particularly my area is youth and young adults between the ages of like 16 to like 30. So they're entering into adulthood. And there have been so many barriers that I like consistently fight for at a policy level that people don't know exist. So for example, when you think about a young person that's 16, 17, 18, that's entering to the adult system, they go from pediatric care, toys in the lobby, to like, now I'm a full-blown adult, and there is absolutely not many resources to support them as they're transitioning into adulthood. And so sometimes it can be so scary if you're a young adult. I work with a lot of young adults that experience psychosis, and they go from like these pediatric mental health centers, and then they automatically go into the lobby with people with acute psychosis, right? So they're like, is this my end? Is this my future? Thinking about our young people with substance use disorder, they go from adolescent groups to like groups where grown men are, like they're 19, but now they're sitting beside men who are like 45. So like there is no spaces that's like catered towards them in their like wellness and like where they are. It's no bridge. It's no bridge in physical care, and it's no bridge in mental health care. So it's so important for us to create those spaces for our young people because they're not there. The same with them just kind of falling through the gaps. We deal with this a lot at a policy level in state government, and I advocate for it like every day. Our young college students, man, like they are in this space where they are sometimes getting kicked off their parents' insurance, and they're trying to finish their master's programs or their bachelor programs, and they are like in this gap of like no care. And you do have college campuses and college centers, but we researched it because I've been advocating for it, but it's like 1,300 students to every one mental health counselor on college campuses. There is no way they can see all of the students, and there is no way that they can like help with the acuity of diagnoses and substance use issues that are coming through the door. But they don't have money to go to other mental health centers. So it's this problem of who is catching these young people as they're trying to navigate these issues with substance use and mental health. We are also running into stigma here. It's stigma, generational stigma. So we've been running into when young people do want help and their parents don't believe that they have an issue, they will not allow them to use their insurances to go and get help. So sometimes we've run into barriers where we want to pay, or we want a young person in the program to give them resources, but their parents' thoughts, views, values, and beliefs doesn't align with mental health or substance use issues. So now these young people are kind of just like not getting the help they need to be better. So they're coping with substance use. We've been seeing that a whole lot. And just at a federal and state level, we are always advocating for funding to support youth and young adults because it is not high on the agenda. School age kids are. So anyone that's, under the age of a teenager, there's a lot of support. They have safety net, they have all of these things to capture them. But our young people, our youth who are using, our young adults who are using and suffering, there's not a lot of urgency to help this population. And so we are often the voice of like, hey, these are the people that are about to replace us. Maybe they need help. Like they're going to take care of us. They're our future leaders. And they're going through a lot too. Like these young people have went through a pandemic, unprecedented presidential race. Like they are struggling with homelessness. Like there are so many barriers that this generation is facing like a lot. So yeah, there's just not a lot of support at a federal level, national level, funding, policy, agency, community. So when we think about the ecological system that we just reviewed, there's kind of a gap in resources for this age. So for me, I would encourage everybody on this call to think about your own systems, think about your own organizations that you work for, think about your own practices and how is it youth and young adult friendly, and is there a space for them in your space? That is generally that. I have a 25-year-old brother. I own my own private practice as well, but I have a 25-year-old brother who keeps me on my P's and Q's about anything G and Z. And when I opened my private practice, I was like, I should put a TV in the lobby, right? Because that's what offices do. And he's like, nobody watches TV anymore. You're like going to waste your money. You should just like not put anything there. And I'm like, okay. He's like, everybody's on their phone anyway. Save me money, but it was something I didn't think about. Even in the bathroom, I was like, I hate this wall. Should I paint it a certain color? And he was like, no, it would be cool if you put a chalkboard wall here so people can leave messages for other people. And I'm like, that's such a Gen Z thing. But incorporating him into just the aesthetics of my office was like, is this Gen Z friendly? If you walk in here, do you feel like you have a space here? And so many of our places do not have a space for young adults. So I would just encourage everyone, if you want to think about how to reach them at their space, incorporate them and think about your own spaces and what small changes can you make to make them feel included and welcome in your space.
Wow, we're just generating a lot of lists. I'm so grateful that we're getting this recorded so that many, many more people will have access to this. Nicola, what can you add to this wealth of riches?
Yeah, they have said some fantastic things. And I agree with them all. I'm gonna, add a little bit, but the TV piece, absolutely same. That I've been doing these interviews with, teenagers at Cherokee Health System and asking them, if we offered this program, how could we tell you about it? What would you think? What if we had information up on the TV in the waiting room? I don't look at the TV. I'm on my phone. Send it to my phone. Oh, okay. Like y'all are just on your phone. Got it. Okay. But I think absolutely. And it kind of, it sounded, some like we were talking about sort of two pieces, like trauma-informed approach and really kind of understanding the idea of jumping from more of a pediatric setting to an adult setting. And what does that mean? And how does that make people, particularly in sort of substance use care, they're coming in to talk to you about something really, really sensitive. And then add to it if they've got psychosis or mental health issues on top of that. But trying to make sure the space is welcoming and that sort of issue. There's lots of great information, I think, out there around that. And then also this sort of culturally appropriate piece to their Gen Z level. And then also maybe thinking about, we talked about stigma and sort of the parents and families may have, particular ideas about my kid doesn't really drink alcohol. My kid doesn't have depression. That's, you're too young to have that. And so are there ways we can try and educate parents to help with that? But maybe also at a larger rate. So it may be that the family has that, but sometimes I think, like we were talking about earlier, the community or the county also has some of those cultural things. And not that we can go in and completely change communities, but trying to educate them more around that these are important. There are evidence-based treatments that we're going to do better if we try and address these things now, right? Developmentally, the younger we're addressing it, the better off we're going to have better long-term outcomes because the longer we'll know, right? You all know, and I'm sure you all are like not, pro stigma or whatever, but that the earlier we get it, the better outcomes we're going to have, the more money we're going to save, and the less people we're going to, have to enter into sort of residential treatment and more significant sorts of treatment. I think navigating systems, absolutely. I think navigating systems, even if you have healthcare, like we all do probably on the call, is difficult, even though we all sort of work in healthcare. I find it difficult enough to sort of figure out who am I supposed to see and who's covered on my insurance. But then if you don't have that and you're losing insurance, so this is maybe sort of a side story, but trying to help my best friend's stepson enter college and learn that he's going to lose his healthcare because he has been on Medicaid because he's lived with just his mom his whole life. And that won't cover him while he is, because, your parents' coverage covers you until you're 26. But if your parents have been on Medicaid because they're in that population, then that's not going to cover them. And so part of it is like, well, where's he going to get healthcare and how is he going to afford to pay for that? And that was really disheartening for me to learn. And that's not Tennessee, that's actually New York, but I think that probably similar across the country. I think maybe one more thing I can add is that thinking about credibility with this population. So we are, especially with substance use, with mental health too, but especially with substance use, asking folks, no matter what your age, admitting that you use any sort of substance is scary, especially for kids. Who are you going to tell? Are you going to call my school? Are you going to call my mom? Are you going to call, my coach, whatever it is, my church? And so I think being clear about what your policies are, being clear about what upfront about what you are able or not able to share with outside sources is important, and trying to build that credibility of your agency with them in the community, because they're sensitive to that and they're thoughtful about it. We, as I said, did a lot of our advertising for that cannabis use disorder study on Facebook and Instagram, and some of it was just sort of trolling, but I think some of it was real concern that we would get messages on our ads like, okay, you're, the police, you're Homeland Security, you're whoever. If we tell you we're using this illegal substance, you're going to come back at us. And we got more of that in Tennessee than we did in Colorado, because we recruited for that in 2 states, right? And of course, there is some more concern in this state where it's illegal and we have, more conservative policies about it. And so I think building that credibility and helping them realize that we, number one, we were clear about what we could or could not share with outside sources, that we really were from the University of Tennessee. Some of the things we had to think about, I think, were what our advertisements really looked like, because old school research, we might just sort of make a flyer and put up a flyer and get folks to sign up. Now, if we're advertising on social media, they have a higher level of what they expect to see. And if it looks sort of like, I'm not an advertiser, right? I just put together a flyer, I'm a researcher. They don't trust it as much. They expect a higher quality, because that helps them build credibility. That helps them think that you've put some time into it, you know what you're doing. So I think that has helped us. And probably most importantly was the voices of the other youth. So I think when we would try to respond back to some of these comments about, you're going to call the cops when I tell you that, I've been using cannabis, when we would try and respond back to them, it could be helpful, it could not be helpful. But when other participants, when we started getting folks enrolled in the project moving along, and then they would respond back and say, no, man, it's real. Like, it helped me. I'm in this program. They really are, like, they're not, some weird social media company stealing our data and selling it somewhere else. I think that, really helps break that barrier when you're hearing from other young adults, teens with similar lived experiences, similar concerns, and they're telling you, no, I've been through it and I had a good experience. I think that was one of the most important things. So I think, these things we've been talking about, all this work Crystal's been doing with trying to include the voices of young adults, include the youth voices, is really important. If there's ways that you can integrate that into your practice, it'll really help build that credibility and build their willingness to share, because we know with substance use and mental health in general, especially substance use, that folks aren't going to often be completely honest with you at session 1. It's going to take some time. They may tell you some of it, depends on sort of the situation, how they're coming in, but the more you can build that rapport, the more you can build that trust, the more likely you are to get a fuller picture of what's happening and the ability to really help them in the most appropriate way, and have the full information of how you can address what's going on for them. That's what I was going to add to that, but yeah.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Before we move on, do we have any other questions in relation to overcoming challenges or barriers and their solutions? I would ask another one, but I'm really clear that we're running short on time here and we can possibly get through all of our questions. So let's move on to number 5 then. And in this one, we'll be going Crystal first, then Nicole, and then Jenna. How can adults in varying capacities best assist in the promotion of treatment and recovery for young people? And then if you can justify the strategy with evidence or research, that would be really helpful. So first off, we'll start with Crystal.
For sure. I did want to drop a resource with, we talked a lot about like learning from young people. One of the agencies that we collaborate with a lot is an agency called Youth Marketing Connection. If you have time, you might want to Google them. They are a national consulting agency for organizations, but the consulting agency is ran by young adults. So they do everything from the contracting to the programming to everything, consulting your needs or whatever. So we often consult with them regarding like campaigns and stuff like that we're trying to do to reach young people. So that is a good resource if you're just trying to figure out like youth culture, how to meet youth where they are. I know, Nicola, you talked about like you had to redo something on social media because the bar is so high. They talk about those things of like, how do you reach young people? What do you need to put on your flyers? What does that need to look like? And they'll even help you design yours. So they were really good and helpful for us. So that's just a little resource I wanted to throw out there. So like my suggestion, I don't know if some of these are evidence-based, I don't know if I did my work, but the first one is be a safe space. That is a big one. Be a safe space. Again, I know we talked a lot about interventions and what we're going to use. There are so many evidence-based interventions. I mean, motivational interviewing requires you to be a safe space. You have to build rapport with the young person before you even try to talk about substance use anyway. So be a safe space and make sure you are meeting the young person where they are, that you are like non-judgmental. That's super huge. And helping young people, I know that seems like, oh, that is the first thing that we always think about, but realistically, we don't always think about that. Like we normally say, oh, they're using, let's figure out how to reduce it. And sometimes we can forget of like taking those steps to see where they are on those stages of changes. Also in our practice, we use a coordinated specialty care model. Again, my primary program is first episode psychosis, but that evidence practice like changed the way that I actually practice across the board. And it's basically a person-centered approach of where we do not create the goals for young people, they create the goals for themselves. And so it feels really crazy because young people come in experiencing psychosis, and you would think like the number one goal is like audio reduction or something like that, or like medication management. And their goals are like, no, I want to go on a date. And wrapping our heads around that when we first started implementing this model was really, really hard to do. But we see the best outcomes because our young people were like, hey, I want to go on a date. And a part of our curriculum was like, well, to go on a date, you kind of can't be talking to yourself. So maybe we should like figure out how to like learn how to date, but also like manage this at the same time. And so normally we would be like medication first. We will be like, no, dating first, and then maybe medication management is required to be able to do that successfully for that young person. So really thinking about the way that you think about treatment for young people, meet them where they are. And just because their goals are not aligned with your therapy goals, because you know our therapist goals are different from our young people goals, doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to work towards their goals. Socialization may be one of their goals, but it also may require reduction of substance use because they may be hanging around a different crowd of people that don't think that's cool. So anyway, think about different approaches, person-centered approaches to working with young people. It doesn't have to be the traditional way of doing things because realistically, sometimes that doesn't work. I would also say, again, I will harp on this to the end of time, integrate young people into your spaces, whether that's you creating a flyer, help them, let them create the flyer. It's you creating outreach or trying to promote awareness and education. If you're trying to educate other young people about substance use, you need young people to be involved in it so young people would look at it. Like she said, nobody's looking at the TV. Maybe you should create a meme. It's just that simple, right? Maybe you should create short videos or like a TikTok video or something. I don't know, but integrate young people into your programming when you are trying to educate and provide awareness about substance use. I would also say like educate yourself in your personal network and not just on oh, these are the data around, you know, substance use, but educate yourself on youth culture, educate yourself on the young adults around you in your community, educate yourself on like resources in your community so that when you guys are having those conversations with young people, you can come to them with something and not just come to them with like a soapbox type thing. So have something for them. Also, I would encourage people to work on stigma reduction in their networks. I don't know about you guys, but I am constantly reducing stigma within my own community, within my own home, within my own parents and everybody else. I'm always reducing the stigma. So that helps. And then lastly, have conversations with young people and reassess your space. So there are a lot of which one we do? We do a lot of, I'll send you the assessment, but we do assessments a lot on our community mental health agencies to see if they're youth and young adult friendly. And so there are assessments out here that you guys can do within your agency or your organization to see if it's youth and young adult friendly, and is it effective for youth? Is it an effective youth space? So I would encourage you guys to assess your own organizations, your own businesses, your own offices to see if young adults feel safe there. So those are my suggestions.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Nicola, turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for that resource, Crystal. We, did a lot better with our social media campaigns once we turned to students and asking students to help us create some of those ads and messages because they were in the age range that, we're looking to target and understood that population better. And I love the idea of, trying to use a participant-directed approach, going with what their goals are. I wish we would do that in lots of ways with medical care, because sometimes, even at the adult level, I think there are lots of times I've experienced anyway within my own family and things where doctors will prescribe a medication, and if it's not like, life-threatening, like it's not like you have diabetes and you need to be on insulin, otherwise you're going to get very sick. But offering a medication and then not really talking with the patient about what they want and what they feel comfortable with, so that they say, oh, okay, because that's a doctor and I'm not going to say no to the doctor, and you take it home and they don't use it. So what is the point? I mean, you just sort of wasted that treatment there. But I too, was thinking about sort of what we've been talking about. So both sort of education and thinking, back to, Lori works in public health, and thinking about what can we do from a public health standpoint to really educate folks around reducing stigma, understanding what substance use is, encouraging folks to change their attitudes and take a bit different perspective around that, to understand where youth might be coming from and why they're trying out these sorts of different things, and what it's, what the pros and cons are, and not just jumping to, you need to quit, this is terrible for you. It may be, but most folks are not stupid. There's probably some reason that they're engaging in that. And how can we sort of understand the signs of, what might be suggesting that there might be some mental health problems or some substance use problems before they get to a bigger, become a bigger issue down the road, and sort of doing some education in general, some public health messaging in general across our communities, counties, states, to address some of that and educate folks more on what those issues are. Sort of changing, stigma and understanding the process, as well as sort of particularly sort of thinking about, opioid use and sort of some of the treatments for that. I think at lots of levels, as I was saying before, I don't work too much in that area. I think y'all may do more, but helping folks to understand what the different kinds of treatments are, and that some of the treatments, are medications that are also opiates, but what the pros and cons of that are, and helping folks make a better educated decision around not thinking that that's just, sort of managed addiction, and that's not good. We don't want to do that either. But that there is good evidence base behind that, and reasons why we would want to use that as a treatment, and not just sort of avoid it and try to go other ways. I think those are my thoughts.
Very good. Jenna, can we turn it back to you?
Sure. I don't have much to add. I think we've covered a lot of things so far that I would share for this question. Something that came to mind that's a little bit different in how that we can assist. Crystal mentioned creating safe spaces, which made me think about taking care of our own selves. if we don't take care of ourselves, our own well-being, if we don't know our own stuff, know what our own triggers are, know when we're getting overwhelmed, if we're starting to feel burnout, then we're not going to be able to care for others, regardless of what capacity we are caring for others in, regardless of what our role is. We need to be mindful of how we're showing up, the influence that we have over young, adolescents and young adults. And so I would just encourage folks to, think about, how do you take care of you? How do you manage when you've got your own stuff going on in your life? Because that's going to happen for everybody at some point. And how do you show up every day in the work that you're doing? So I'm going to leave it with that.
Wonderful. And I hope all of our panelists are getting a little bit of a look in the chat, because there's been some great appreciation shown for everything that's been said thus far. And one person also shared that, I love this setup for a meeting. It's so productive and so many perspectives. So kudos to you all. We're moving on to number 6, unless there's a question from the audience thus far.
One other, really quick thing I was going to say in terms of education, educating people is, some things I've realized over the last few years is just even helping people understand that we all kind of work in the substance use space. We know what it is. I think there's a lot of folks out there that I've come across, even in my own family, that don't understand that it's a clinical diagnosis, or that it can be, right? Not all substance use is necessarily a diagnosis, but I think there are still many folks out there in the country that think this is something private, something you don't talk about. It's not something a doctor would write down as a diagnosis, but it is, and helping them understand that it's not something just to be ashamed of or an issue, but it can be a serious health issue. Just a thought.
Thank you for that, Nicola. I think it's also important to think about that with the person who may be experiencing the diagnosis, right? Because self-stigma is so telling, and not understanding that it's a disease that can be treated and one can be supported to higher levels of health. So yeah, very good message. So now we'll be going on to question number 6. This one, Nicola will start us out, then Jenna, and then Crystal. Adolescent substance use has declined during COVID, but adolescent overdoses and mental health challenges have increased. How do trends such as these influence your work in the field and the communities you serve? And again, we'll be starting out with Nicola.
Yep. Sorry, I muted myself there. Absolutely. I think we are happy is the right word, but glad to see that there have been some decreases in adolescent substance use over time. Our adolescents and, sort of doing prevention, many of you are in prevention, we know that we're going to get a bigger bang for our buck there. I think that that's a lot of how we've gotten tobacco use in this country to decrease, is by sort of treating the older folks, but then targeting the younger folks to not even start that process. So glad to see the substance use decreases, but we have seen a lot of mental health increases. And so for me, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, that we've been really trying and really being, forced to sort of, once we saw our data, begin to incorporate more mental health treatment into that. So we've been looking at depression treatment. We're now about to start a pilot looking at anxiety treatment, because I'm forgetting the numbers offhand, but at least in our cannabis use disorder in young adults trial, maybe not the vast majority, but the majority, a large chunk of our participants had also some, besides our cannabis use disorder, some depression and anxiety or other sorts of mental health issues. So I think it's something that we, can't really separate, which makes sense, right? Substance use disorder is a mental health disorder all of its own, but often is sort of, develops in some way as a coping mechanism for something else. whether that be stress or substance use or stress or mental health or other sorts of issues. And so I think we, going forward, are thinking much more about integrated care and pulling those sorts of things together. And what do we need to treat first? So we've been writing a grant trying to look at, offering both of those, care for both, so care for depression and care for cannabis use disorder, trying to determine, do we need to treat one before the other? Do we need to integrate them? Because there isn't, unfortunately, lots of solid research and practice guidelines around how do you do that? Because they've always sort of lived in siloed kind of treatment systems, separate from physical health, but also sometimes separate from each other. Substance use specialists or do substance use, mental health specialists do mental health. I think there's more combined now, but still sort of somewhat separate fields. And so we're trying to look at how can we do that? How do we best address how to treat each of those? And how do we understand, as we've been talking about, what the young adults want? What do they say as the important thing to sort of treat first? Can we make it flexible? Because I think that's some of the information and the feedback we're getting is, how do we make, because we're doing these, sort of tech-based interventions, text messaging, can we, expand our programming and build these programs up to another level where they can be flexible enough to deal, to allow youth the choice to sort of address the issue that is current for them. Because if we are, have a plan to sort of do targeting negative thoughts and trying to work them through, how do they challenge negative thoughts and come to the end of it? If that's not sort of what's top of mind for them that day and the key issue that's coming up for them, it sort of falls a little flat. It's not something, they don't engage as well. And so trying to find ways that we can make that more flexible to meet them where they're at, to give them that choice, because that helps to keep them more engaged in the intervention and keep them learning from that treatment. And I think thinking, finding ways, like we've been talking about, sort of screening, finding ways to integrate screening even more so into some of the settings that we have, to try and identify who are the folks that may, move on to overdose, which is, not just, right, you all know this, it's not just use, we're sort of going to the end of the spectrum there where you may really hurt yourself if you survive it. Trying to find ways that we integrate better screening tools into some of our community settings and try to catch some data on all the youth coming through so that we can try to identify that earlier, address it earlier, get them into the support services that they need to prevent some of those overdoses, and prevent that, overdose number from continuing to escalate as we've seen it do in the adult population over the last several years. So that's where I think we're trying to address each of those issues in my work.
Jenna, let's turn the floor to you.
A few things. So in terms of addressing overdose, one of the first things I think about is harm reduction approaches and how can we incorporate harm reduction into practices, especially for the young adult age group, but really across the board. So is there access to naloxone? Is there education provided around that? Do people know how to reverse an overdose? Is that easily accessible? Something that the child and adolescent grantees have been focusing on is having naloxone in schools. So having it with either, some folks call them stop the bleed kits or first aid kits, or having it where an AED might be found, but increasing access to life-saving medication, utilizing medication for opioid use disorder when that's appropriate, using that as a, there's some evidence that shows that that's beneficial even without treatment. So incorporating, other broad harm reduction techniques to address the overdose portion of that. It also makes me think about medication and education for parents about like locking up medication or limiting access to medication, not leaving old prescriptions around, just ways that youth can access some things that they might not even realize can be very dangerous for them. One of the other things I was thinking about, I was just doing another presentation that talked about, the rates that have increased in terms of mental health, and I'm also glad substance use rates have decreased. I think that's wonderful. But one of the contributing factors that we're seeing is a decline in parent and caregiver well-being, and an increase in the proportion of children who have ever lived with someone with a mental health concern. And so again, kind of going back to that, like supporting the whole family, figuring out what other needs might be there, because that's one of the factors that's contributing to seeing the increase in mental health. And this is an aside, but it's something that I definitely see, not related to substance use, but an increase in children and adolescents and adults that are being diagnosed with autism. So that rate has significantly increased as well. And I think that plays a role in stress on a family, on a whole system, which can contribute to substance use or mental health concerns kind of more broadly within a family system. But those rates have significantly increased as well. It's 1 in 36 children in 2024 compared to 1 in 68 in 2010, and that's in the United States. So those rates, I think, that just contributes to the overall health and well-being of a family. So that's where I'll leave it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Really good point. You're starting to bring in ACEs into this whole constellation. I really appreciate that. Crystal.
Yeah, I always hate to go last because they give y'all so much good stuff. But anyway, I would think like drugs are scary. When we think about like substance use going down, but like overdose is going up. And like while I'm a mental health therapist and I can say this all contributes to like co-occurring things. But I thought about like now, like how drugs even are packaged, if that makes sense. It is scary how like edibles look like candy, or like how fentanyl can be like added into so much stuff, and it's scary of like just a little bit of it can like take you out. And so I don't think that our young people have enough aware, or our parents, like your kids could be in front of you with drugs and you might think it's Skittles or something. Like I just think the lack of awareness in like the packaging of drugs and what it looks like, and the like potency of it and how quick it can take a life, there's not enough awareness around it. And I don't know how it can be, because I think it can, our education efforts can go up, but I also think like these drugs are packaged really quickly and there's something new on the streets every day. And I think our young people are not always aware of what they're consuming. They're not always aware of like, they're just smoking marijuana, but it's laced with fentanyl and they die after they take one puff. And so I've seen heard so many testimonies, or like parents testimonies about that, of like their kids and like how they died and they didn't even know they were like using substances. So I think just awareness and education around like the packaging of drugs and how that is rapidly changing, and how awareness to our young people too of how potent these drugs are. I also like the ideal of like pushing harm reduction, which is really big. We have a trainer on our team that does a training around the strands of marijuana. And because again, my population is first episode psychosis, he talks about how these strands affect delusions and audio and visual hallucinations. And so I think that our young people and realizing like how some of these drugs can impact them on a deeper level may be more helpful education, and just instead of saying like stop using, but like if you use this may happen, or this may be a better strain for you to use. And so really broadening our awareness of intentions when we're working with young people. And I also, the last thing I had that may seem like it does not correlate, but I feel like it correlates so much. In our department, we do this training called Transition to Independence Process Model, where we talk a lot about the executive functioning of our young people. And I think we forget, as providers, as family members, as community members, one of the biggest jobs we have is helping our young people build their executive functioning, their ability to solve problems, their ability to think things through. And I think that sometimes when we can help our young people build that muscle, they're able to think through the process of using, or the process of like, I don't have to use as a coping skill, right? Like I can think about other options to solve this problem in front of me. So I think in addition with education, harm reduction, we also should be helping them with their problem solving skills and like future planning skills too. A part of this model is planning their future of like, how can this drug use impact the future that I'm trying to create for myself? So this model puts all of this together of like weighing out the pros and cons. Who are my necessary partners? Like, what are my values and beliefs? And also giving them strength-based language and outlooks to think about their lives in the future and think about the decisions that they're making, and leveraging that to support them. So I think it's a picture, education, recognizing the family, like we've all said, recognizing stigma, culture, and just the experiences of our young people. I think with all of those things, we could reduce substance use in this population.
Thank you all so very much. I failed in my job as the moderator because I was supposed to allow time for one last question, which I failed to do. So with that, I apologize. But I want to thank our panelists for all that they contributed to our session today, the wonderful expertise and experience that they shared. I don't know about you, but I'll be listening to this again and taking much better notes, because I was just listening this time, because we have a wealth of resources from this session. And I thank you all, Jenna, Crystal, Nicola, for all that you provided. I am showing right now, I hope maybe I turned it off. I would like to make sure that everybody has a chance to fill out what you thought about today's session. And it will only take a couple seconds to do that. So there we have both the tiny URL and also the code. I want to thank all of our participants today. I hope you received the information that you didn't. And if you need more information, I very much encourage you to reach out to me. And if I can't assist, I will be happy to put you in contact with people who can. So without further ado, I wish you all a very wonderful weekend. And again, thank you so very much to our panelists.